So I did something that I thought I would never do. I got a Sony camera. This is the Sony A1, the original, and this is the 50mm 1.4 GM from Sony. I also picked up this lens. This is the new Sony 28-70 f2 G Master lens. This was actually one of the reasons that I started to get curious about the Sony system, but we'll talk more about that. But yeah, I just wanted to sort of come clean and tell you guys that I, for the first time in my career, am cheating on Canon. Well, I guess not for the first time because I had a GFX, but the GFX was never meant to replace my digital camera system. I don't know why I've always been loyal to Canon. It's just like the camera that I started my business with, and it's the system that I've known so well for so long and have sort of relied on and trusted for so long. And I wouldn't say that I'm switching to Sony, but this experience with the Sony camera was sort of an experiment because I had never used a Sony camera before, and I was really curious to try it out, to see if I liked it, to see if it could sway me over to the dark side. And I have to say, I am pleasantly surprised with my findings. So why Sony? Why am I even considering stepping away from Canon? Well, I'm not really. I don't think that we're going to leave Canon. I don't think that we're switching to Sony. Famous last words, right? But as of now, as of today, I don't foresee us switching over to Sony completely. But I do think my main digital camera for weddings might be switching to Sony. Certainly a Sony Canon hybrid model. So let's talk about that. So the A1, why was I interested in this camera? Well, this is the original A1. It came out a few years ago now. They just released the A1 Mark II, and so the A1 was on sale new for a slightly lower price than it originally hit the market with. This is an expensive camera. It's their flagship model. Has a 50 megapixel sensor. It has a lot of really amazing specs. It can basically do everything that the Canon cameras do. It's almost equivalent in every way to, the R system in terms of features and capabilities and things like that. For the way that I photograph weddings, I knew that the Sony system would be similar to the Canon system, at least in terms of what it can do and sensor size and all of that. Going back to the GFX, that is a digital camera that's very different from the Canon system and the Sony system. It's slower, it has a larger sensor, it doesn't have as many lens options, it's not as fast-paced, not necessarily like a workhorse camera like this guy is. So I knew I would be able to use the Sony system in the same way that I use the Canon system. And I found that to be very true with the A1. I used to think I would never try a Sony camera, mostly because I always felt like the brand was a little bit too like electronics for me and not camera enough. Like Canon is a camera brand. It's a camera maker. Like that's what they do. And Sony is an electronics company. I think what I've learned is that digital cameras are electronics and Sony is really good at what they do. Not to say Canon is not, because I also love the Canon system, but there's something really satisfying about these cameras, more so than I ever thought. I like this camera more than I ever thought I would. So why did I finally decide to try the Sony system? I'd been hearing a lot of good things from really successful wedding photographers about using alpha cameras. There are lots of really well-known photographers that use them, so that started to pique my interest. Photographers like Corbin Gherkin, KT Mary, Jose Villa, Joel Serrato, Abigail Lewis. All these people shoot with the Sony Alpha cameras. Loads more too, but those are the people that I sort of had been hearing about. We went to the Hybrid Collective earlier this year. I heard photographers talking about the Sony system. I recently shot 2 weddings alongside Abigail Lewis, and she was using the Sony system with the new 28-70 f2. This is another reason that I was curious, because this lens is a pound lighter. It's so much smaller than the Canon version. And I really thought to myself, man, if I like that 28-70 f2 from Sony, that could be a legitimate option for a wedding day, for a one lens only camera, digital camera on a wedding day. And I've been able to use the 28-70 f2 on the A1 for a couple of weeks now. I've shot 2 weddings with it. This lens is incredible. It is so much lighter and smaller and sharper than the Canon version. The Canon version is great. It's an amazing lens. It was groundbreaking, honestly, when it came out, but you can really feel the more modern technology in this one, and I really appreciate the size and weight change. Just to give you an example, here's the 28-70 from Sony. Here's the 24-70 from Canon. The Sony lens is still bigger, but it's almost the same size and weight as this 24-70 from Canon. So that should give you an idea of this change in size. And with the A1, this lens is just beautiful. It's more prime-like than any zoom lens I've ever used. It's sharp. It's just a gorgeous lens. So that in and of itself was one of the main reasons that I wanted to try the Sony system. Sony also released a new 50-150 f2, which was another really interesting lens. And I just thought, well, if I had the Sony system and understood it and could use it, then I would be able to take advantage of the newest technology from both major camera brands, Canon and Sony. Canon has amazing lenses too, like the 24-105 f2.8. They had the 28-70 f2 long before Sony, for years before Sony. So having both systems and understanding both systems gives us access to use the latest and greatest technology, which is not something that is necessarily important with photography, but it's something that I value because I really like exploring new technologies and utilizing new equipment in our business. So for me, that's a plus. The other thing I've been hearing about were Sony colors and how they differ from Canon colors. And I heard a lot of photographers talking about how Canon colors on the R system were so difficult and Sony is just so much easier. It's been interesting to see files side by side. I feel like there's not as much difference as people were saying, but I do think that the Sony files, at least from what I'm seeing on the A1, it seems like there's a little bit more depth to them. And I've been mostly comparing the A1 files with the R5 Mark II files because they have a similar resolution. The R5 Mark II having 45 megapixel sensor and the A1 having a 50 megapixel sensor. But there's something about the A1's files that they just feel more rich. There's a depth to them that is really satisfying. They've got great color, sharpness, resolution, really easy to edit. In particular, skin tones look really good on the Sony and the greens are slightly deeper. Honestly, it's been easy to blend the two together kind of seamlessly. So I don't know if color alone is enough reason to switch to a new system, but I've certainly been enjoying the files from the A1. This is still new for me, and I've gone through ups and downs with it, thinking, oh my God, am I gonna have to switch to a completely new camera system? It's gonna be so expensive and annoying. To, oh my God, I should return the Sony. I don't need it. The Canon files and the Sony files can be integrated, so why am I bothering? But I think ultimately what I've decided is, for me as a professional wedding photographer, having both of these systems is not a bad thing. If anything, it's a benefit. It's like having another tool in the toolkit. And certainly this lens in and of itself is a major reason to keep the Sony system around. It's just sort of unbeatable for a wedding day. It allows me to basically use one digital body all day, and then the rest of my cameras are film cameras, which is kind of the way that I want to be working. So that's a huge plus. One area where the A1 is not as strong, at least in my initial testing, is in low light. It's still great in low light, honestly, for having a 50 megapixel sensor, but I just think that the noise performance is not as good as some of the Canon cameras, particularly the R3, which is just incredible in low light. So what I've decided, at least for now, is to use the A1 with the 28-70 pretty much all day, and once it gets dark, put a flash on it, and then use my R3 for more ambient photos. I have all my primes on Canon, my 85-1.2, my 50-1.2, so it just makes sense to use the R3 with the primes for like low light ambient kind of shots, more candid shots, things like that, and then the A1 as like the main photojournalism camera, and not relying on it for low light, and sort of combining these two systems together to really get the most from my gear. So that's kind of my plan, rather than going all in on one camera brand just because. I don't know, there are pros and cons to each of those. When you move to a new system, you have to think about batteries, lenses, memory cards, flashes. There's so much that goes into it. But I think ultimately having a foot in both systems sort of makes your toolkit a little bit more well-rounded in a sense. I love learning new camera systems and knowing about how cameras work, and I like knowing about the lineup of camera bodies and lenses and sort of how each manufacturer like markets their cameras. So I kind of like nerd out about that stuff. So that's another reason that I was curious to get into Sony, because I really knew nothing about Sony cameras at all. And here I am, a professional wedding photographer, and I don't know. I want to know more about the other camera makers and like what's available to me, and like educate myself. So that's another, reason that I'm sort of happy that I have been experimenting with this camera. But yeah, so anyway, to sum it up, been loving shooting with the A1 for the past couple of weeks. It's not replacing my Canon gear just yet. It's more of an integration into my sort of toolkit, into my workflow. I hope this is interesting to you. If you care at all about cameras, let me know if you have questions about the system. If you have tips for me on using Sony cameras, let me know in the comments. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.